What if I told you that some of the food sitting in your kitchen right now could be quietly helping your arteries heal, while other foods labeled heart healthy may be doing the exact opposite? And here's the scary part. Most people don't discover the truth until after the warning signs start. High blood pressure, chest discomfort, shortness of breath, fatigue, or worse, a stroke or heart attack that seem to come out of nowhere. Because plaque does not build overnight. It builds silently, slowly, and for years, it can grow inside your arteries without causing a single dramatic symptom. That's what makes it dangerous. If you ask 10 different people what the best diet for the heart is, you'll probably hear 10 different answers. One person says cut all carbs. Another says go vegan. Someone else says Mediterranean, DASH, keto, paleo, carnivore. But after years of practicing medicine and helping patients use food more strategically, I can tell you something most people do not want to hear. The perfect diet means nothing if you can't stay on it. A plan that is realistic, repeatable, and sustainable will beat an extreme diet almost every time. So instead of chasing food trends, I want to focus on something much more powerful. The specific foods and compounds that keep showing up again and again in research on atherosclerosis. In other words, the high-yield foods that may help slow plaque progression, reduce inflammation, protect your arteries, and improve the conditions that allow plaque to grow in the first place. And stay with me, because near the end, I'm also going to show you the healthy foods many people trust but shouldn't. The type of exercise that has actually been linked to plaque reduction, and one supplement with surprisingly solid evidence behind it. Because if you understand what's really happening inside the artery wall, then you stop guessing and start making choices that actually matter. Before we talk about the best foods, you need to understand what plaque actually is, because this is where a lot of people get misled. Plaque is not just cholesterol, it's not just sugar, it's not just blood pressure, and it's not just inflammation. Plaque forms when several problems collide at the same time. First, the inner lining of the artery, called the endothelium, gets damaged. This thin, protective layer is supposed to help blood vessels stay smooth, flexible, and resistant to injury. But over time, things like high blood pressure, smoking, insulin resistance, chronic inflammation, and oxidative stress can damage it. Once that lining becomes vulnerable, LDL particles, especially the ones carrying ApoB, can slip into the artery wall. Now the trouble begins. Those particles can become oxidized. And once that happens, your immune system sees them as a threat. White blood cells rush in, trying to clean up the damage. But instead of fixing the problem, the entire area becomes more inflamed, more unstable, and more crowded. That is how plaque grows. Little by little, year after year, the artery becomes stiffer, narrower, and more dangerous. And the real danger is not just the size of the plaque. Sometimes the most dangerous plaques are the unstable ones, the ones that can rupture, the ones that can trigger a clot, the ones that can suddenly turn into a medical emergency. So if you want to support your arteries through diet, your food needs to do more than one job. Ideally, it should help. Lower ApoB and LDL burden, reduce oxidative stress, calm inflammation, improve nitric oxide production, protect the endothelium, and quiet down an overreactive immune response. That is the lens I want you to use as we go through the rest of this video. One of the most overlooked patterns in research is this. Foods rich in lycopene keep showing up again and again. Lycopene is a carotenoid found in red and pink fruits and vegetables. Tomatoes are the most famous example, but you also find it in watermelon, pink grapefruit, guava, and papaya. And this matters because oxidative stress is one of the engines driving plaque formation. Think of oxidative stress like chemical wear and tear inside your arteries. It damages cells, worsens inflammation, and makes the environment more favorable for plaque growth. Lycopene appears to help counter that process because it acts as a powerful antioxidant. In simpler terms, it helps neutralize some of the damage before it spirals. Now here's what makes this interesting. A lot of people look at tomatoes and think, that's nice, but how much difference can that really make? But artery disease is not usually driven by one giant mistake. It's driven by years of repeated small damage, which means small protective habits matter more than people realize. And lycopene-rich foods may be one of those habits. For many people, an easy way to use this is not by doing anything extreme. It's simply by making these foods regular. Tomatoes in meals, watermelon in season, pink grapefruit if appropriate for your medications. Tomato-based dishes made with real ingredients, not sugary processed sauces. That's the big theme here. Consistency beats intensity. Now let's talk about phytosterols. This is one of the smartest tricks nature plays on the body. Phytosterols are natural plant compounds found in nuts, seeds, legumes, whole grains, avocados, leafy greens, and vegetables like carrots and broccoli. Flaxseed and sesame seeds are especially notable sources. What's fascinating is that phytosterols look structurally similar to cholesterol. So when you eat them, they compete with cholesterol for absorption in the intestines. Less cholesterol gets absorbed, and that changes what happens next in the liver. And this is important because many people still assume that the cholesterol in their blood mostly comes from cholesterol in their food. But most of your cholesterol is actually made by your liver. When the liver senses that less cholesterol is being absorbed, it responds by pulling more LDL particles out of the bloodstream. Over time, that can reduce the number of particles circulating through your arteries. And that matters because ApoB-containing particles are deeply involved in plaque formation. This is one reason why foods like seeds, legumes, and high-fiber plant foods are so often associated with better cardiovascular outcomes. They don't just sound healthy. They affect the traffic inside the bloodstream. So when people ask me, what should I add first? I often think less about trendy superfoods and more about the basics most people ignore. A handful of nuts, ground flaxseed, beans, lentils, sesame, vegetables, avocado, whole foods your grandparents would recognize. Nothing glamorous. But sometimes, the least glamorous foods do the heaviest lifting. Next, let's talk about flavonoids. Flavonoids are natural compounds found in berries, apples, citrus fruits, onions, leafy greens, cocoa, and tea. They don't get as much attention as protein or omega-3s, but they may be doing something very important inside the arteries. Remember how plaque starts getting worse once oxidized LDL creates a kind of inflammatory traffic jam? Flavonoids may help lower that stickiness. They appear to influence the expression of adhesion molecules. In plain English, that means they can help make artery walls less inviting to inflammatory cells. Fewer cells attach. Less irritation builds up. The whole inflammatory process becomes a little less chaotic. That may not sound dramatic, but inside a blood vessel, less chaos is a very good thing. One especially important subgroup is catechins, found in green tea and black tea. This is why tea keeps showing up in discussions about cardiovascular protection. Not because it's magic. Not because it instantly cleans out plaque like a pipe cleaner. But because it may influence oxidative stress, inflammation, and vascular function in a favorable direction over time. And that's the pattern you should notice by now. Most of the foods that help the heart do not work like a drug. They work like repeated support. Quiet support. Daily support. Support that changes the environment inside your arteries little by little, which is exactly how plaque built up in the first place. Now let's talk about extra virgin olive oil. This is one of the rare foods that is both famous and, in many cases, actually worthy of the hype. Extra virgin olive oil contains monounsaturated fats and polyphenols that appear to have antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. Those compounds may help protect the endothelium, reduce oxidative damage, and improve insulin sensitivity. In other words, it may help on several fronts at once. And that's exactly what you want when you're dealing with a disease as complex as atherosclerosis. Because plaque does not grow from one single cause, so foods that influence multiple pathways tend to be especially valuable. But here's where people get confused. Not all olive oil is equal. A heavily processed oil with weak flavor and low polyphenol content is not the same as a quality extra virgin olive oil. The more real it tastes, the more peppery, grassy, or slightly bitter it is, the more likely you're getting some of those protective compounds. So yes, olive oil can be a smart part of a heart-supportive routine, but pouring it over ultra-processed food does not magically cancel out everything else on the plate. It's a helpful tool, not a magic eraser. Another major player is fatty fish. Salmon, sardines, mackerel, herring. These fish are rich in EPA and DHA, two omega-3 fatty acids that have been studied extensively for heart health. Why do they matter? Because plaque is not just a cholesterol problem. It is also an inflammatory problem. And omega-3s may help calm some of that inflammatory activity. They may also support nitric oxide production, improve endothelial function, and make plaque less likely to become unstable. That last part is crucial. A stable plaque is very different from a vulnerable plaque. Some people walk around with plaque for years and never have an acute event. Others have a sudden rupture that changes their life in a single afternoon. Stability matters. And fatty fish may help move things in the safer direction. For people who don't eat seafood regularly, this is often one of the biggest missed opportunities in the diet. Not because fish is trendy, because the biology behind it actually makes sense. Again, not magic, not overnight, but meaningful. Now let's get into the part most people really need to hear, because eating the right foods is only half the battle. The other half is avoiding the foods that pretend to be healthy. And this is where a lot of damage happens. Some of the most harmful foods for artery health are not always the obvious junk foods. Sometimes they're the ones sold with wellness branding, clean labels, and smiling packaging. Take flavored yogurt. People assume yogurt is healthy, and plain yogurt can be a good option for many people. But flavored yogurts are often packed with added sugar. That means you may be getting a dessert disguised as breakfast. Then there are granola bars, protein bars, and many packaged breakfast snacks. Some of these are basically candy bars and activewear. And then we come to one of the sneakiest problems of all: juice. Apple juice, orange juice, green juice. No added sugar, all natural, made with real fruit. Sounds innocent, but when fruit is stripped of fiber and turned into liquid sugar, the body handles it very differently. It becomes easy to consume a concentrated sugar load very quickly, without the natural slowing effect of chewing and fiber. Whole fruit is not the enemy, but fruit in liquid form can become a very different metabolic story. And if someone already has insulin resistance, high triglycerides, fatty liver, abdominal weight gain, or blood sugar issues, this matters even more. So when you hear the phrase, heart healthy, don't just trust the front of the package. Turn it around. Read the ingredients. Read the sugar content. And remember this: a pretty label can still hide an ugly metabolic effect. Now let's go beyond food. Because if you want to change artery health, what you do with your body matters just as much as what you do with your fork. Exercise is one of the most powerful tools we have for cardiovascular health. But there is one form of exercise that deserves special attention when we talk about plaque. high-intensity interval training, or HIIT. This surprises a lot of people because many assume walking is enough. Walking is excellent. I recommend it often. But when researchers looked at supervised high-intensity interval training, they found something very interesting. Over time, it was associated with a reduction in plaque volume. Now, that does not mean everyone should immediately sprint at full speed tomorrow morning, especially if you have heart disease, symptoms, or major risk factors. This needs to be approached appropriately and safely. But the key point is this: your arteries respond to challenge. Done correctly, intervals can improve vascular function, insulin sensitivity, blood pressure regulation, and overall cardiovascular fitness. In a sense, they train the blood vessels to become more resilient. And that resilience may matter more than people realize. So if someone is physically able, medically cleared, and properly guided, interval training may be one of the highest return forms of exercise they can use. Let's talk about one supplement that often gets overlooked: aged garlic extract. Most supplements for heart health are overhyped, underwhelming, or supported by weak evidence. But aged garlic extract is more interesting than people think. There have been studies suggesting it may help slow the progression of coronary artery calcification, improve blood pressure, and even support plaque stability. Now, I want to be very clear here. This is not a replacement for proper medical care. It is not a substitute for risk factor control, medication when appropriate, exercise, or diet. And it is definitely not permission to self-treat serious cardiovascular disease. But among the huge sea of supplements that promise miracles, this is one of the few that has at least enough evidence to deserve a serious conversation. And sometimes that's the real win. Not hype, just something genuinely worth discussing. There's one more bonus strategy I want to mention: sauna therapy. Now, this is not because we have perfect evidence showing that saunas directly reverse plaque. We don't. But we do have enough indirect evidence to pay attention. Sauna use has been linked in research to improved endothelial function, better blood pressure patterns, and even lower overall mortality in some populations. It may help the body relax blood vessels, improve circulation, and reduce certain stress responses. Think of it as supportive, not curative. Not a miracle, not a shortcut. But for people who have access to it and tolerate it well, it may be another useful tool in the bigger cardiovascular picture. And that's really the message of this entire video. There is rarely one single food, one single supplement, or one single habit that saves the day. But when you combine the right ones consistently, you begin to change the environment inside the body. Less inflammation, less oxidation, better endothelial health, better metabolic control, better blood vessel function, and over time, that can matter a lot. So if you take one thing away from this video, let it be this: do not wait for symptoms to become dramatic before you take your arteries seriously. Plaque can grow for years in silence, and by the time the body screams, the process is often already advanced. That's why the smartest approach is not panic. It's strategy. Eat more of the foods that consistently show up in the research: lycopene-rich foods, phytosterol-rich foods, flavonoid-rich foods, extra virgin olive oil, and fatty fish. Be skeptical of processed foods dressed up as healthy. Use exercise as medicine when it's safe to do so. And if you want to go further, have a serious conversation with your doctor about the tools that may support you best based on your personal risk. Because the goal is not just to live longer. It's to keep your arteries healthier, your blood flowing better, and your future safer. If this video helped you, subscribe and let me know in the comments which of these foods you already eat and which one surprised you the most.